name's Imogen Radford, and this is a talk from the Tales from the River project, which is one of the 24 projects of the Brecks, Fenedge and Rivers set of projects, which are supported by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And these 24 projects are all about the different aspects of the rivers, including conservation, outdoor activities like swimming and other things, walking and so on, and archaeology and heritage, a whole range of things, all to do with the rivers. And that's been a 5-year project coming to the end this December. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you some images and talk about the project a bit more, what we've been gathering, what it tells us, about the sorts of places people talk about for recreation or where they go for trade or industry. And then I'm going to take you on a trip along each of the 3 main rivers and their tributaries and other waterways to illustrate that with a few examples. So, sorry, I'm supposed to be moving on to the next slide, but hang on a sec. There we go, got it. So this map shows, you can see the Brecks there in a sort of lighter green in the middle. That's the Brecks area, I think many of us will be familiar with. And then the blue lines are obviously the rivers snaking across. And there are, it's quite dramatic really, isn't it? There's quite a lot of rivers, and that's in a way why the rivers are so important, because they are arteries, and they, in an area that's forest and heath and farmland, they really matter. They've been long used for transport, moving particularly heavy things such as stones to build Bury St Edmunds Abbey or Thetford Priory, and then flints and coal, corn, sugar beet and so on. And the rivers themselves are often the reason why towns and villages actually grew up where they are. Nowadays, they're perhaps a bit more appreciated for recreation and wildlife, but still we have a strong connection with our rivers in the Brecks, as everywhere. So this map shows the BFER. By the way, Brecks, Fenedge and Land Rivers, etc. is rather a long name, so BFER for short. So this is the project area. You can see the Brecks just about on there, and then the blue blodgy bits are the actual project area, and they very much follow the rivers and also the fen edge, which the fen edge goes along the left, and the river snake across the middle there. And so we've used this map a lot in the project, and we've taken it to all sorts of events and walks and talks and so on, and got people to put a sticker on with a colour. I bet some of you have done this. Put a different colour depending on what activity you do or have done in the past, swimming, boating, fishing or whatever. And it's been very interesting to gather the information, but also very interesting to get people talking, because they chat away to each other and to whoever's nearby, and it really raises a lot of interest. People talk about their swimming experiences, where they went walking, they took their horse, or they took photos, or sometimes just enjoyed contemplating the river and wildlife. And some people told us about the land that they owned by the rivers as well. So we've been mapping the recreation places that people have told us about, and so far up to 129, still counting, and I've mapped them on this Google map, which I'll be sharing publicly soon. And when you go onto that map and you click on any of those little icons, that takes you to some more information about each place, and maybe some links to a website or a map, old map or something. So it's been very interesting to gather all that information. So in the project, we've been gathering information in different forms. So we've done oral history interviews, done about 20 of those, been really interesting, and written stories, and people have chatted to us at different events, walks, talks, social media as well has been an important thing. So this picture, I love this picture. It's one of the first I saw when putting together the project, and it comes from the Lake and Heath Heritage Group, who've got a wonderful collection of images in their area. And this is a photo from 1947 of Lake and Heath Mill Pond, which is just outside the village. And they shared this picture on Facebook and got loads and loads of comments, probably about 50 or 60 comments. and lots of different people said, "Ah, yes, that was my nan so and so, and that was my great aunt," and they talked about the women and how much fun they were, and I think you can see that from the picture. And another example we gathered recently was from in an oral history interview with a woman of 96, and she used to go paddling in the Pingos on Thompson Common when she was a little girl, so 90 years ago. That's rather nice. This was a very special thing we gathered in the project. Well, we were given. It was a bit of a bonus, an unexpected bonus, at one of our first drop-in sessions in Thetford. And they brought along a copy of the thesis written in 1994 by a local woman. And she studied swimming in the town in great detail. She gathered memories, did research. She mapped them, mapped the places, and talked about the river swimming baths as well. And I'll come back to that later. And her map is on the left, where she numbered spots with the names, all the different names people had given the places. And the one on the right is a redrawing of that map, which was done as an animation by the Ancient House history clubs. And part of the project, we got them together. And what they did is they used that material along with oral history material and other stuff. And they put together a film. It's a wonderful film. Find it on YouTube, on the BFER YouTube. It's called A Fun History of Thetford's Rivers. And yeah, they were really inspired by that. They used animation and all sorts of other ways of doing it. And this photo is at the river swimming baths in 1960 from the Thetford Town Guide. And they also put together an exhibition, and this has been touring the museums and libraries and other venues across the Brecks. 6 panels, which they called Tales from the Riverbank. Again, you can perhaps see swimming, fishing, boating, and all sorts of other activities with photos and stories, all sorts of interesting stories. And you can see that online. So we've been gathering these stories, and they're about recreation, all the different sorts I've already mentioned, and also trade and industry has come up as we went along. And this is a marvellous image from a collection of Alan H. Faulkner, which is at Croxton Staunch. And there's some men fishing there. And staunches were a place where people did go for recreation. Now, the subject of trade and industry is covered much more fully by the Industrious Rivers Project, and that's doing an extensive study which should be coming out very early in the new year. Should be really fascinating. So I'm going to tell you about staunches. Actually, I'll also tell you, I'll probably forget which way to pronounce it because it's sort of spelt staunches, which probably means staunching the flow. But people pronounce it locally stanches, so I might do either. And they're a quite complicated subject. They're all different designs, but basically what they do, they aid navigation on a river that's flowing, as ours do. And they basically have a gate, or sometimes 2 gates, which are winched by various means up and down to control the water level so that the boats can go up and down. They stop the water for a bit and then they can go through. Some of them use different sorts of winches, including a number of them have an enormous wheel. I haven't got a good picture of that here, but it's as big as 4 cartwheels put together. And a man would get up on it and walk round it a bit like a hamster in a cage. But it was a very effective way of doing it. There are people who are very expert on this who are currently studying all the photos of stanches they can get their whole hands on to try and figure out exactly which ones are where, which is not as easy as you might think. The one on the left we think is at Croxton, but I won't swear to it. The one on the right here is a more recent picture at Brandon Staunch in 1978. And there's a quote from W.G. Clark, who wrote a book called In Breckland Wilds in 1925. He was a local journalist. He wrote a lot of newspaper articles as well. And he talks all about the staunches in quite a bit of detail. And this is a quote from him. "In the river below each staunch is a deep pool or staunch hole, usually a favourite place for fishing and bathing. And the one on the left is actually called a swim at the staunch. So the sort of places for recreation. So we've got staunches already mentioned, bridges, ferries and fords. And this is North Pickenham Ford in 1934. And you can see that people, children there are having a lovely time and the mothers probably are looking on. And they often coincided, likewise with mills and sometimes quarries as well. So it's the sort of places people went. They might be just crossing the river, perhaps, or they might be going for trade or industry or for some other purpose. Tended to be the same place. They went for recreation, perhaps because they could get access or they'd just always been there. Don't know exactly why, but it definitely coincides. So that's why, in a way, although this project's about recreation, I can't help talking about places of industry at the same time. Okay, so I've talked about the sort of places. Now I'm going to go up some rivers. I'm going to go from low to high. I'm using these maps just to introduce the sections. They've come from the Environment Agency's main rivers maps, and I've highlighted the route of the river just to make it clearer. So this is the River Lark. I've also put on the cut-off channel, which sort of cuts across all of them. And we're going to go up the River Lark from below Isleham, through Mildenhall, up to Bury St Edmunds. So first of all, this is way below Isleham. And on the left, you can see, it's a bit of a dark photo, but you can see hopefully some lighters. They belong to the Mildenhall Fen Drainage Board, and that's a photo from 1913. Now, lighters, I don't know if I've explained what they are yet, but I'd better do that soon, because they're sort of peculiar to this area, really, and they're basically a sort of barge, usually a fairly small type of barge that's not powered. It's not a powered boat. It is hauled or hailed by horses usually, and sometimes by steam tugs. And then to be more efficient, they would be in a gang, which, you might think, is joining several of them together. And so we'll come back to them later as well. But here, their job is to maintain the riverbanks, and the mill on the right, that's what's left of it. It had sails previously, and that its job was to be drainage. So the fens was originally marshes, and of course they were drained over centuries, but that has to be maintained by pumping and repair work. So we start in the fens and then we make our way upstream, and I'm going to cut across to a different activity here, but in Isleham. And at Isleham Ferry, now the picture on the left shows the ferry just about, if you can see that. And there's a lot of these ferries going across the river, which were basically usually powered by a chain. You powered it yourself by pulling a chain, and you could get about a dozen people or a horse and cart on it. And this is Isleham Ferry, which is just downstream of Isleham itself, upstream, sorry, of Isleham itself. And there was also a very popular pub there. But what happened was it became extremely popular for baptisms in the river. And the river was so popular that it became known as the River Jordan, with a biblical slant to it there. Now, there was a really famous preacher called, a Baptist preacher called Charles Spurgeon. He wrote an autobiography in 1897, and that's an image from it. And he became inspired at the age of 15 to become a Baptist, and he walked 8 miles from Bury St Edmunds to be baptised in the River Lark at this particular place. And later on, he became incredibly famous. He preached to crowds of 10,000 at a time, all over the country and beyond. When he had his baptism, he talked about that, and he said, "The wind blew down the river with a cutting blast as my turn came to wade into the flood. But after I'd walked a few steps and noted the people on the ferry boat and in boats and on either shore, I felt as if heaven and earth and hell might all gaze upon me. My timidity was washed away. It floated down the river into the sea, and it must have been devoured by the fishes, for I've never felt anything of the kind since. Baptism also loosed my tongue, and from that day it has never been quiet." And you can see there one of the a barge crowded with people watching a baptism. You can't see the baptism in that picture, but it's happening to the left. And here is a baptism just upstream at Jude's Ferry in West Row, which I think many people might know as a pub, very popular pub. It's at the head of navigation for motorboats at the moment. And again, you've got thousands of people coming there. It stopped in the early 1970s, although there was one American serviceman baptised in 1982. And then also in 2022, a swimmer got baptised at Brandon Staunch. But generally they do it indoors now. I don't think it's heated. Or it might be a bit. Anyway, it was definitely cold. Now, going upstream, this is now Mildenhall. And this image shows the gasworks on the right and the gas lock and the gas pen. The pen being the place where the boats would wait to go up through the lock. It's not, every town would have its gasworks in the 19th century, and it would be there to burn coal in order to create gas, which was used for lighting and before electricity came along, and then for cooking as well. And the Lark was actually called the Coal River because so much coal came up to the Mildenhall gasworks and up to Bury and various other places. The name of the gasworks lives on. It's called the Gas Pool, the bit of river next to it, and it's an incredibly popular place for swimming and for jumping as well. I'm not sure what these men are doing. If you've got any idea, please put it in the chat. They've got a big tin bath and a small tin bucket, and it's not entirely clear what they're up to, so very intrigued by that. This picture is looking downstream from the town bridge in Mildenhall. You can see a couple of lighters on the right and a mill on the left, and it looks down to some locks. And the River Lark was really busy with navigation, 17th, 18th and early 19th century. They transported coal, as I mentioned, and other goods. And in 1845, 10,000 tonnes of those goods were transported through Mildenhall up to Bury. It's a 16-mile navigation, 26 kilometres, and it stopped at other villages and at mills along the way. So the lighters were used in gangs, as we mentioned earlier. This is a picture from 1889 of rebuilding the turf lock that we were just looking downstream to. And the navigation was very vibrant in the mid-19th century, but as soon as the railway came, it really declined very dramatically because there was a competition. But they made a real effort to revive it in the late 19th century. And hundreds of navvies worked really hard, digging, repairing, building, and here are some of them in this picture. They turned a staunch, which were, a long-running way of doing it, but not very efficient. It was quite slow. Locks were a lot quicker. And they worked so hard over a cold winter that a local dignitary put up a public subscription, and they were rewarded by a dinner of roast beef and plum pudding in 1890 for that hard work. But it declined, unfortunately. They tried really hard, but it declined. And by the 1900s, only a few lighters were operating beyond Mildenhall, taking coal and corn up to Icklingham Mill and bringing back flint and gravel from the quarries there. And to Mildenhall as well, it was declining by the 1920s. There were still pleasure boats taking parties up and down the river for a bit longer. And also pleasure boats of a smaller sort. So on Bank Holiday 1899, a local journalist called William Howlett, who wrote a lot about this, he reported seeing 40 boats carrying day trippers just on one day. The picture in the bottom right there is something called the Wammill White Stone. No one really knows what it is. It's in the place where there was a double staunch, but we're not sure whether it was part of that. So that possibly adds to its attraction, but it's an iconic location in the memory of locals. And quite a few people have talked about it. And here's one quote. "The fun days we used to have as kids spent by the river up Wammill at the White Stone. with a blow-up tube from the garage and jam sandwiches and a bottle of squash. And some other memories. The gas pool I mentioned earlier, people would swim or they'd jump off the sluice. Even apparently some people would jump off on their BMX bikes. And one person remembered jumping in fully clothed after a session at the Ship. And that's the Ship there in the middle left. It was a pub, very popular pub, right on top of the river there. And behind it is Parker's Mill, which was rebuilt in 1908 and kept going till the 70s. The Ship itself has now gone, although it has moved back and become a private house. The mill itself was revived. It generated electricity for the town, did other things. Other stories people talk about, a group of lads used to borrow the Riverboard's weed cutting punt, take it all the way back up to Barton Mills and back, and thought nobody knew they'd done it. Other people went fishing for grayling and bullheads and gudgeon. They caught eels, and the local fish shop, Snushell's, would buy it from them. They had recreation in the a revival of river recreation in the 1970s. They had an event called Larking in the Lark, and they had raft building and swimming, tug of war, bonfire, and lots more. I'm going to change to a completely different subject here just for a moment. This is an image of boathouses on the left there, and I'm a bit intrigued by them. I don't actually know a great deal, so I'd be interested to hear if people know more. But you can see them on old maps. You see lots of boathouses marked, and I think some of them were the gardens of great houses or large houses where they would have things like coal or other goods delivered, and some of them are just for pleasure, to store your nice little boat underneath. Just quickly, Icklingham Mills. There are quite a few mills up there. It's the same mill. The one on the left is early 20th century, and then later on they built all these other buildings around it. And since then it's been, lots of different renovations. It no longer runs on water power, but it still grinds flour. It was Marston's for a century, but it is now Haygate's, still going strong. This is Temple Bridge. We're going further up the Lark now. And this is the picture on the left is 1976. The bridge was rebuilt in 1912, so that it could be tall enough for the boats to come underneath it. But sadly, as we heard, they'd more or less stopped by then. And it's just been crumbling ever since. You could drive across it until 2002, but a nasty crack developed, as you can see on the picture in the right, and it was declared unsafe and demolished in 2007. There's still a footbridge, but it's a very popular place for people to go. Particularly, it's originally an ancient river crossing point. The name Temple comes from the medieval Christian order of Knights Templar, and they had a temple apparently in lands and collected money from local mills. And some people have told us some memories about that place. And here's a couple. Many a summer spent down Temple Bridge. I vividly remember my mum saying I wasn't to go down the weir, and of course I didn't listen and had to come home in my new white denim shorts covered in green algae. I got in so much trouble. I remember a night or two taking a rubber dinghy down the weir in the dark while camping. And it's popular now as well. This is Icklingham Bridge or Farthing Bridge, also known as Three Bridges. And you can see the remnants of an old staunch and lock still there. The gates aren't there now, but the walls still are. You can see them in this picture as well. And that is also an incredibly popular swimming place now. It's a very small river, really, but there's just a deep hole, as there often is when there's been a staunch. Here's a quote from Roger Deakin, who wrote a book called Waterlog in 1999, where he swam all around the country, including in East Anglia. And he swam quite a few places in the Lark. And he said, I plunged in a delightful deep pool beside an old humpback bridge above the mill at Icklingham. So further up the Lark, this is at Farnham, Duck Sluice. It's no longer really there that you can see it much of. But in 1915, in the First World War, soldiers were stationed at the Farnham Park nearby. And a local photographer called Walton Burrell, he did a lot of different work, but he was absolutely fascinated by these soldiers. And there are dozens of wonderful photos that he took of them in the Suffolk Archives collection. I'm just going to show you a couple of them. And it's a wonderful collection. It just shows it's obviously a very hot summer. They probably had to wear very scratchy, hot uniforms most of the time, but here they are at play, having the most wonderful, wonderful time diving in and splashing about, diving, swimming. And in this one, you can see a bit more of the the sluice. It wasn't a staunch, it was a sluice structure here, which provided little waterfalls to play in, which is quite a common feature with either mill pools or staunch pools. There's some kind of waterfall that people enjoy. And also these modifications of the river create deep stretches or deep pools that people can swim in or do other things, or dive or jump. So there's a close relationship there. One of our oral history interviews, who lives in Bury St Edmunds, has always lived there. He grew up in the 1950s on the new Mildenhall Road estate, and the nearby river was an absolute magnet for all the children. Whether their parents were keen on that or not, is not sure. But he said that the staunch boards were still there in the 50s. So there was a long stretch of water, 6 to 8 feet deep, which was ideal for swimming. And he said, we always used to call it the cold rivers when we were kids. But of course, I now know it was the cold rivers. It was cold, but not at all warm, but cold was the real reason for that name. And this is a rather cheeky screenshot from a website because I wanted to just have a glimpse of this photo of the head of navigation in 1890 when they were doing all this work to get everything up and running again, and they had this opening ceremony with all the dignitaries in all their posh suits. It wasn't quite ready, but they got the ceremony underway. But sadly, it didn't last. And nowadays, the same location is Tesco's car park, and the river is a sad shadow of its former self in a concrete channel. The website, the St Edmundsbury Chronicle, is absolutely fascinating if you've got any interest at all in anything really in the area, but there's an enormous section on the River Lark, and it tells the entire story of all the ups and downs, all the comings and goings, lots of information about the navigation, but also more recent uses as well. So do check that out. So we've done the Lark now. Now I'm going to do a combination of rivers here, the Lakenheath Lode, and then the Little Ouse, the Thet, and the Blackbourne. On this map, you can see Lakenheath Lode off to the left, the cut-off channel snaking down the left, and then the Little Ouse coming up through the middle and then branching out into the Thet, and then the Blackbourne River coming off down to the bottom there. So starting in Lakenheath, the Lakenheath Lode was a really important navigation channel coming from the Little Ouse up to Lakenheath, which was an important town for flints and other goods. They had quays or hides, and it was a highway as well for people. By the 1930s, there no longer was navigation, but the Lode was still maintained until the late 1940s. And we interviewed a local man in his 90s called Cyril, who told us all about that because he worked for the board. And he also talked about the building of the cut-off channel. And that made a dramatic change to things. So in these photos, you see a couple of the bridges, the high bridges to let the barges come under, and also a pub called the High Bridge pub on the channel there. And the one on the right is a family party of Rolfs. Rolfs are very well known in the area, and this is one of their relatives gave this wonderful photo. And Cyril talked about when he was a child, when he was young, he would swim and fish in the Lode, as did lots of everyone else. And he said, I can't remember learning to swim, but it was in the Willows, which was a sandy part of the Lode, not far from the High. I suspect that my elder brother said, "Go on, get in, boy." And that was that. So that was my first introduction to water. But the new drainage channel made the load redundant, and village people lost the means of youngsters learning the art of swimming and fishing. And the cut-off channel was important because the fens were drained, but there was still flooding. And in the 30s, there were quite a few major floods. And then there was the Second World War, and then 1947, absolutely massive flood, really enormous impact on the whole area of the fens and coming up into the Brecks. And that gave a really strong impetus to building some relief channels, 3 different relief channels in the area, which were built between the cutoff was built between 1954 and 1964, and it made a big difference to the rivers there. So this is in Lakenheath, the village pond, different sort of waterway, but equally important. It was very important in villages in the old days because horses and carts needed them. The horses could have a drink, and the wheels were iron tyres on wooden frames, and in hot weather they would dry out. So they needed to soak them in water to make them fit, otherwise they were rattly and not very efficient. Pond itself was just a very popular place as well. People would sit and hang around it. And then in 1942, in the middle of the war, they turned the pond and the green next to it into a beach for the children. And it made national news. And there was a feature article in Daily Mirror that year. And the Lakenheath Heritage Group wanted to get a copy of that article. But they wanted to charge some absolutely enormous fee. So instead, they asked a local artist, Daphne Austin, to interpret it as an artwork instead. And she produced The Seaside at Lakenheath, which is a rather wonderful picture. So something good came out of that. So this is the Green Dragon at Botany Bay. This is where the Lakenheath Lode joins the Little Ouse. Botany Bay is a sort of name that's given to places that are very remote. There was a pub here, this pub called the Green Dragon. It was apparently open all the time, never closed, used by boatmen and river maintenance workers like Cyril and others. And people would come for a picnic on a nice day. And they had a chain ferry. You pulled yourself across the river to get to farms on the other side or just to help your journey. It disappeared in 50s or 60s. Still, the foundations are there, but everything else has gone. So I'm going to whiz upstream on the Little Ouse, under Wilton Bridge, past Hockwald Lode. This is the new, known as the New Bridge. It's the railway bridge just below Brandon. Another popular place. Apparently there were enormous fish there, lampreys and others. And this is a family party going swimming and boating. And people on the right is an older photo in 1900 of people from the same family going boating in their Sunday finery. There were a number of different swim spots along the river in Brandon, all got their own names. And first of all, there's the Osier Holt, which is a willow woodland, and that's what that name means, but its name got changed over time, over the generations. It changed into Uger Holt, and then the Luger or Lugers, and all different names. But it was very popular with people who lived in the Town Street part of Brandon. And then the Leeches, a bit further upstream, not a particularly nice name, but it was a sandy, shallow place, very popular with kids. And there's again Patrick on the right and other friends in 1957. Then the Staunch, by the Staunch, again popular. It was shallow in those days. It got deeper later, and it's shallow again now. But nowadays there's a lot of structure there. But there it is, looking a bit more pastoral. Now moving up to Brandon Bridge, and here are some more lighters. Or still working. I think there's some coal there or something being loaded. And that's the old Brandon Bridge on the left. And that's the 1890s when navigation was quite vibrant. The one on the right shows, again, some people from Patrick Baldwin's family with their new dinghy. And you can also see some maltings and you can see a temporary bridge that was put up. Brandon Bridge was very old, very narrow, 17th century or something, and it just couldn't cope with the tanks that had to go across this important river crossing. So they built up a temporary bridge, and then later on they replaced the old bridge in the in about 1954, because it just was not adequate for modern travel. So we're moving up from Brandon, and this is the one on the left is at Santon Down and Staunch, what was left of it in 1947, which is not very much. Patrick's mother there, looking very glamorous, but it's a very popular place. For miles around, people went for picnics. It's actually called St Helens Picnic Place now, and always people have gone swimming there. Picture on the right is Fison's works at 2 Mile Bottom early in the 20th century, and they actually kept navigation going in this river a bit longer than others up until 1929. They still brought the materials they needed to create fertilizers, manure first and then fertilizers up the river. So that went on till 1929, though it had stopped earlier, going further up to Thetford. 2 Mile Bottom Common, just nearby, was a very popular destination for the people of Thetford. It was just a short cycle ride or drive from Thetford for swimming and camping. There was a spring there, so you didn't have to take any water with you. You could just drink from this clear spring. Some found that a little dull and went upstream a bit to Turf Pool Stanch, where I'm talking about memories of the 50s and 60s. And there was some remnants of the Staunch there, which created a bit more of a current, so a bit more fun. As you go up towards Thetford, there's a number of different swim spots and other places. The first Staunch, which is in the 50s, was outside of Thetford itself. It was farmland, all built up now, and the water meadows there. And this is a town bridge with some more lighters. One of those has got an enormous mast, which presumably has to come down before they go under that rather low old bridge. You can see some buildings on the right, on the other side of the bridge. So we're looking from downstream of the bridge, looking up. Where that building on the right is now where you'd have Captain Mannering's statue and the cinema. This picture is from the same vantage point again, and you can see the buildings and a little bit of a maltings chimney behind. I don't know why there's all those people there, perhaps just a Sunday day out, about 1910. There's a quote from the 17th century. The Attorney General, called Roger North, was at Thetford Grammar School as a boy, and he said about Thetford, "There was a navigable river in the town, which above the bridge branched into many brooks and streams. This made us all expert boatmen, swimmers and fishers." So here's the Maltings looking up from Town Bridge. And it's very hard to reconcile this with what we have now. What we have now is on the left shops and on the right a sort of green, and then the cinema. Completely different. And that was there until the late 60s, mid-60s, 65, that picture is. And there are stories of boating on this stretch of the river, and the local lads called it Death Alley, because once you if you got into any trouble, you couldn't get out. There was just these walls. And so very different from now. This is the coffee mill, or the water mill as it was, on the left, very well known in Thetford. It's called the coffee mill. It was only grinding coffee for about 20 years, from 1936 to 1956, but it's very evocative for those who lived there at the time because of the smell of coffee. And a woman told her story. She said, "I used to watch the sacks being hoisted up to the mill, and if there was a small hole in them, I'd get a few coffee beans and nibble on them all day. I can still taste them now if I close my eyes and remember. The girls used to smell lovely when they finished work." So Thetford has got so much history, I can't cover hardly any of it in the time. I'm not going to talk about its brief history as a spa town, or about Spring Walk, or the waterfalls that were favourite beauty spots in the town, still are, or the pulpware works. even though they're important. I'm going to skip straight up to Nuns Bridges, still up on the Little Ouse. And the picture on the left is looking at the three of the bridges from Ford Place down towards the south. One on the right is from the 1970s, someone fishing, rather nice old Bedford van there. So a very popular place for all sorts of things. And just up from there is the famous river swimming baths and sheds in Thetford, which are so well known and remembered by those that or people hear about them. There's still a little bit of concrete left. And there's a lot of history about that, which you can find in various places that we've produced, including the film I mentioned earlier that the young people made, A Fun History of Thetford's Rivers, and on the interpretation panels that should be going up in early December. And yeah, so we've had lots of oral history information about this. I realise my time is going. I'm talking. I've got so much information to share with you that I'm going to skip over the baths, fascinating as they are, and move on quickly to Melford Bridge, that's actually going back to the Thet, but that was, you could see some people there in the distance paddling. It used to be known as the Bridge Tavern. The pub you can just see on the right was linked with the Thetford Bridge station, but still popular for paddling. And this is Barnham Cross Common, which is on the Little Ouse, just on the edge of Thetford. Likewise, people would go there all day for a picnic, or they'd get a baked potato heated up at the gasworks. And then further up, going off the Little Ouse, is the Blackbourne River. It goes up through the Euston estate to Honington and Sapperston, which is a pair of villages with a river between them, but joins them. And lots of history of recreation there, including this wonderful raft race that was organised in the 1980s by a very vibrant youth club organiser called Trevor J. Fondly remembered, and looks so much fun. So, skipping to the River Wissey, got another complicated river with bits and pieces on it, and again the cut-off on the left. Going to quickly skip. So starting at Wissington, sugar beet, really big issue in the thing in the area. There's several gangs of lighters there. You can see quite a few. Can't count them. There's so many, full of sugar beet, loading or unloading at the factory, and that created because they used barges up until 1925. A very large, wide area of river, which is still used today for recreation. People have shared with us memories of taking the sugar beet by horse and cart, or seeing the barges loaded up from the fields. In 1925, they brought in road and rail a bit later on, renewed the factory in the 70s. And this is Stoke Ferry. Couple of wonderful images from the Stoke Ferry History Group. I'm not going to talk about it much because that group has set up a marvellous website which is full of information. So I suggest checking that out. Lots of information being gathered there. That's wharves by the river. So there's a little story, Stoke Ferry. This is a houseboat called the Mayflower, and there was a story in the newspaper in 1954, and it said, Captain Cross, who celebrates his 90th birthday next Sunday, lives in a comfortable houseboat moored at one of the most picturesque spots on the River Wissey at Stoke Ferry. He said, I have electric light and a gas stove where I can prepare my tea, and I have my main meals sent in from a nearby hotel. I've not known such trouble-free comfort and good health for years, he said. Cut-off channel, mentioned that before. This picture is actually a different channel down a market, but it would have been the same sort of thing. Very dramatic change to the landscape. It cut through paths that people would have taken. It cut through the common, but then it created a long river with sandy beaches, which people really enjoyed and still do. It's an important drainage channel, as we heard, but recreation for fishing as well. Somebody actually told a story of driving a car up it when it was frozen. This is Whittington. This is the maltings at Whittington. And just opposite those maltings is a lane that goes down to the river called Water Lane. And local Roger Warner told us about the horses and carts used to take the malted barley down to the barges and bring barley up to the maltings. Had to be enough space for a horse and cart to turn round. It's still there, but it's not that wide, and they've been turned into houses. But there's lots of information about that on the Stoke Ferry History Group website. And Roger also told us about boating. He's always been involved in boating, and him and his family, and also fishing, always on the river, doing one thing or another. This is a junction of the Wissey and Stringside drain. I've got the wrong caption on there by mistake. It should be Salmon's Hole, which was a popular place where, as you can see, some young people swimming and hanging about in there. One family used to swim further upstream where there's a weir, and they would sit on it and get washed over. Oxborough Ferry, just upstream of there. There's a long and detailed history of Oxborough itself, which had an important town and Hythe. But the ferry was a key crossing point. There's a couple of different ferries, the bigger one on the right. A local talked about going there in 1949, and his grandfather told him about putting carts and horses on the ferry platform, because otherwise it would have been a really long way around. And he and many others have talked about swimming in the river there, and also a bit further upstream, having a rope swing. Other stories about swimming in the Oxborough Drain and the River Gadder. There was a place near the sawmill with a big tree which people would jump off, and some people even played in the sawmill. Oxborough Hall, that's up the river there, up the Gadder there. I think everybody's heard of Oxborough Hall. This image comes from an article about a finishing school. They needed to raise money, and this article said, what more happily and characteristically English background for finishing a girl could be found in Oxborough Hall. The girls bathe in the dredged and deepened moat. On a sunny morning, Lady Paston Bedingfield is on the bank, Elizabeth is ready to dive, and Margaret's in the motorboat with Sir Edmund Bedingfield, the 9th Baronet. And that family would fish and boat and swim, along with the gardener's son, Bob, and locals were invited to come in. And the gardener, Bob was the gardener's son, and his sister Mary talked to us about fishing in the moat for eels, and her mum cooking them. And this is further upstream at Goodeston Ford. On the left is the old ford, and then on the right they are got some kind of ceremony to do with building a bridge over the ford with a steamroller. That's come from the Oxborough History Group, who are still trying to find out more about it, actually. These local history groups exist all the way along the routes of these rivers and have put together all sorts of history. I haven't mentioned them all, but they're in Brandon and Thetford and elsewhere. So carrying on up the Wissey, Northwold Mill and the Didlington Estate. This is a picture of the 1920s swimming pool that was set up there by the owner at the time. There's a story about Didlington Hall from an officer who was stationed there in the war. He wrote about his experiences over a whole year. He was really fascinated by the wildlife, by the soldiers swimming in the pool and the river, and also he met several young children in the area who were swimming and fishing and befriended him. And talked about their experiences. And somebody else also on the Norfolk Mills website, where they have got a lot of detail about all the different mills. They talk about Northwold Mill, which is right next to this estate. And somebody commented, or somebody's story is on there. He said, "My father was head keeper on the Didlington estate, and I used to swim with another keeper's son, Gerald Dye, both in the river and at the mill. Our fishing expeditions in the river were unmitigated failures, equipped with a bent ping, dough, and string." So that's a private estate, but quite an interesting bit of history there. It's famous for Howard Carter visiting the incredibly enormous and impressive hall with all its sphinxes and Egyptian stuff, and being inspired to go and find Tutankhamun. This I showed another picture of North Pickenham Ford earlier. It's the same one. In 1934, you see the old-fashioned cars and church on that one. So there are many more stories all the way along the River Wissey, its tributaries. I haven't even mentioned all the other waters: Linford Water, Stanford Water on the Battle area, the Watton Brook, Loch Neaton, Thompson Water, and then the River Lark, Little Ouse, Thet and Blackbourne and elsewhere. So many more stories, and we've gathered lots of them. There are plenty more out there as well. But I've run out of time to tell you any more. I hope you found that interesting. So just finally, thank you for listening. Thanks to all our oral history interviews, everyone who's told us their stories and let us use their photos. This is one of those photos. This was given by George Pallick in Brandon, looks upstream, in the 1950s. That's his mother, looking very smart, and him and his brother playing in the river. So there'll be more information, on the project generally in future. You can find more on the brecks.org website, the BFER website, and another website, osbrecks.co.uk. It's not actually operating yet, but that will be by the end of this year, in early December. That will be operating, and we can expand on all of this information we've gathered and share it as a legacy into the future. It's been a fascinating experience to find out so much about these rivers and how people interacted with them. I hope you found that interesting. I'd be interested to see any comments or questions you might have in the chat.